Okay, good evening and good Yom Tov. Today's Yud Gimel Tammuz. It is the second day of the Chag HaGeula, Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, the 12th and 13th day of Tammuz, where we celebrate the release of the previous Rebbe from Russian prison, 1927, when he single-handedly stood up against the communists, the Soviets, and he stood very, very firm and very, very strong in order to keep Yiddishkeit, to keep Judaism alive. And this led for him to come out from there and to continue the spreading of the Torah and Hasidus in Europe and then here in the United States. And the fact that we're sitting here today and studying the teachings of the Torah is due to this special day. And one of the things the Frierdiker Rebbe taught us is the ability of standing firm on your grounds, being very strong in your convictions, and not to care whatever they say, because he did it with in face of the interrogators when they tried to trap him and to threaten him. Nevertheless, he stood his ground with Mesirus Nefesh, with self-sacrifice. And in a way, this ties in to the discussion that we're going to have today, although the whole discussion is going to be more an halachic discussion in what determines a Jew and so on. And when did the Jewish people become Jewish? What did they have to go through? But ultimately also leads to the understanding, as we shall see what we learn from the story with Moshe, how he reacted in face of challenges. And that's what we'll take a very, very good lesson from this. So, the story we're discussing today is about the Jewish people after they tried. The enemies tried to bring him down in many different ways. They couldn't. After Hashem protected them as they left Egypt, and no matter what happened, Hashem was always there, and he was protecting them. Now, and after they saw they couldn't succeed, they couldn't overcome the Jewish people, they came up with a new plan. And that is that they are going to get the Jews to turn away from God. And when this happens, they felt that then they become vulnerable and they will be able to overcome. So what did they do? The Midianites, the Moabites, they came and they got their daughters to seduce the Jewish people to sin with them. And as a result of sinning with them, they also got them to worship the idols. The daughters convinced the Jewish men that if they want to be with them, they better worship the idol. And that was a terrible, terrible thing. And Hashem told Moshe to go and kill those people who worship the idol. This is punishable by death. And then a tragedy happened. Now, one of the leaders of the Jewish people came and he challenged Moshe. So let's inside what exactly happened. So here the Torah says, Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you killed a man who attached themselves to the Baal Peor. Baal Peor is that idol. A Jewish man came and brought a Midianite woman to his brother before the eyes of Moses and before the eyes of the entire congregation of the children of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of the meeting. Jewish people saw this thing, it was terrible, and they were crying. Right in front of the whole Moed, they can imagine. The tent of the meeting, this is the place where God reveals himself. So Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Cohen, he saw this, he arose from the congregation and took a spear in his hand. He went after the man into the chamber and drove his spear through both, the Jewish man and the woman, through her stomach, and the plague ceased from the children of Israel. So a plague started as a result. And when he did what he did, Pinchas, and he killed that man and that woman, that stopped the plague. Who was that man? As I said, this was one of the leaders. He was in fact the leader of the tribe of Shimon, Zimri, the son of Saul. And in fact, his people, the people of his tribe, most of them, and many of them, they committed the sins with the daughters of Moab and worshiped the idol, consequently. So who was that man? So here's from the Talmud. The tribe of Shimon went to Zimri, the son of Saul, their prince, and said to him, they are executing our man, and you sit here silently. What did he do? He gathered 24,000 people and went to Cosbi, a Moabite princess, and he said to her, do my bidding. She replied, I am the daughter of a king, and my father instructed me to only give myself up to the leader of the Jews. She wanted Moses. And he said to her, I too am a tribal prince. Moreover, I am greater than Moses, for I am the second son to my father, and he is the third child to his father. So he grabbed her by the mane of hair and brought her to before Moshe. And he said to him, son of Amram, talking so disrespectfully to Moses, son of Amram, is this woman permitted to me or forbidden? If you say she is forbidden, who permitted you to marry the daughter of Yisrael? So, what happened with him, we all know. As we said, Pinchas killed them both after they went and did what he did. But what we don't find is that Moshe should reply to the question, to the challenge that Zimri had. Zimri challenged Moses and asked him, what's the difference? How can you marry Tzipporah, who was the daughter of Yisrael, also a Midianite, and I cannot? What happened with Moses? What's the background of Moses? So we know the story. And Moshe had to run away from Egypt, and he came all the way to Midian. And there, he met the daughters of Yisrael, as we find in the Torah written. Moses was forced to flee from Egypt. He arrived in Midian, and as we read in Exodus, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to the well and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's sheep. And the shepherds came and drove them away. And Moses arose and helped them, and he watered their sheep. They came home to their father, Reuel. As we know, Yisro had many different names. Reuel was one of them. And he asked, "Why did you hasten to arrive today? You did it so fast." And they replied, "There was an Egyptian man who saved us from the shepherds, and he also drew water for us and watered our sheep." And he said to his daughters, "And where is he? Summon him and let him eat bread." And Moses consented to remain with the man. And the man gave Moses his daughter Zipporah for a wife. And she gave birth to a child, and he called the child Gershom. Why Gershom? Because he said, "I was a stranger in a foreign land." So, if Moses was a stranger in a foreign land and he married a stranger, how could he do that? Why was Moses allowed to marry Zipporah if she wasn't Jewish? And the answer, of course, is, as Rashi tells us, that Moshe koidem matan Torah nasa. Moses married Zipporah before the Torah was given. When the Torah was given, all Jews had the status of a Noahide. Meaning before the Torah was given. Let's say before the Torah was given, the Jews, all Jews, they had the status of the Noahide. They all entered the yoke of the commandments, and Zipporah along with them, as well as many converts from the mixed multitudes. Those are the people, Egyptians, who joined the Jewish people, who joined them when they left Egypt. So here we find, this is what we need what we're going to discuss here. What exactly was the category, of the Jewish people before the Torah was given? Were they considered like everybody else, Noahites? Or did they have any other determinations? So it seems to, Moshe is saying that according to Rashi, the Jewish people had the status of B'nai Noach, the Noahites. Noahites, by the way, what does Noahite mean? Children of Noach. Children of Noach refers to all mankind. Because after the flood, Noach was the only man left. He was the father of all mankind. And all of them called the children of Noach, not Jewish. And that basically is a simple answer. And that this is the difference between before. Moses took Zipporah, he married Zipporah before the Torah was given. And the story with this tragedy happened, of course, after the Torah was given and they were not allowed. But it's not as simple as we might think. It's going to get a little more complicated and complex until we'll get to the bottom of it. Now, the question is, what exactly happened? With what did they become Jewish? How did they become Jewish? How did the Jewish people become a nation? And there's a few questions we can ask here. Number one, by what process? What process did the Jews become Jewish? And were all Jews required to convert after they received the Torah? Yeah, so we know today, if someone not Jewish wants to become Jewish, he needs to convert. So then, when they received the Torah, did they convert? The question then leads to another question. Because we know if people convert, they get a new status. Let's say a couple, a non-Jewish couple wants to convert. They were married before, and now they both discovered Judaism, and they want to convert. So the question is, do they need to remarry? And the answer is yes, because they were not married Jewish before. So here's the question. If, let's say, the Jewish people did convert at Mount Sinai or at that time, did they also need to remarry? That's question number 2. Did all Jewish couple need to remarry after they received the Torah? And finally, question number 3 is, what about the Kohanim? What is the Kohanim? The Kohanim, of course, are the priests, people in the family of Cohens. I am a Cohen, happen to be a Cohen. So there are special laws of who is allowed, who a Cohen is allowed to marry. A Cohen cannot marry just any Jew. He cannot marry a divorced Jew, Jewish woman. And also one of the things he's not allowed to marry is a convert. A convert can marry any Jew, but not a Cohen. A Cohen that God gave strict rules that the Cohen cannot marry someone who is a convert. He has to marry only someone who is born Jewish, to a Jewish father and mother. And the question is, what about the Cohens? So the Cohens that were there at the Mount Sinai, if everybody else, if all the Jewish people were considered converts, and now if they need to remarry, is the Cohen allowed to marry his own wife after she became a convert? Because we all became converts. Do they have to separate? Do they have to wait for the next generation born? And finally, another question is, what about Moses himself? Moses was also in a way considered a Cohen, although really the Cohen was his brother Aaron. Aaron a Cohen and his children were the Cohens, a family of priests. But Moses also had a status of Cohen during the 7 days of the inauguration of the temple. When they practiced doing the service in the temple when they first built it. So he was a Cohen. So his wife Tzipporah was a convert. Is he allowed to stay married to her? So those are interesting questions. So that's the question. What were the Kohanim permitted to remarry if the women were now converts? How was Moshe able to remain married to his wife if she was a convert? So what we're going to do today is we're going to start doing rabbinical research. Like rabbis, when they need to come to a conclusion, to understanding of a law, they need to do research, and you look into the precedents of previous researchers and sages, and you come to a conclusion, you come to understanding of what's going on. So we're going to quote a few of the sources, starting with Rashi, that we already quoted before. But in Rashi, and again, the question is whether the people really needed to convert, whether the Jewish people really needed to convert. In Rashi is somewhat ambiguous. If we go back to text 4, we'll see what Rashi said. Rashi says this: Moses married Tzipporah before the Torah was given. When the Torah was given, all Jews had the status of Noahide. Okay? They all entered the yoke of the commandments. So on the one hand, it does mention that they were Noahites. They had the status of Noahites, meaning that they were not Jewish. But then it does not say specifically that they converted. He said they entered the yoke of the commandments. Nichnasu leklal mitzvot. Enter the generality of accepting the mitzvahs, the commandments. So here in Rashi, we don't find, and also he seems to Rashi, he differentiates between the Jewish people and the mixed multitudes. He says, as well as many converts from the mixed multitudes. So obviously he makes a differentiation. He says the Jews came along with the many converts. Meaning, what do you infer from this? That the Jews themselves, at the time before the Torah was given, they were not considered converts. Or after the Torah was given also, that they were not considered converts. They accepted the yoke of mitzvahs. So here in Rashi, it's not very clear. So we're going to look in other sources, other rabbinical sources. Okay, so Rashi's view is too ambiguous to support a clear-cut conclusion. Here we have Rabbi Meir ben Todros Alevi Abulafia. So Rabbi Abulafia, he says as follows. The Torah was given and the new ban on intermarriage was promulgated. That became a new law. The Torah only banned future intermarriages, but those who were married before the Torah was given were not forbidden to remain married. So basically, according to Rabbi Abulafia, it seems like the transfer was like an automatic transfer, that they changed its status from non-Jew to Jew, but it wasn't through a specific process. He said they didn't need to have conversion. It was just, those who were married before the Torah was given, they were not forbidden to remain married. So according to Rabbi Abulafia's view, it seems like Judaism was automatically conferred upon the Jews, and the Jews, their spouses, they transitioned into Judaism with them. Now we have another opinion, which seems to be quite similar to Rabbi Abulafia, and this is from Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rabbi Yaakov Emden, the Yavets, he lived in the 17th century. So it says, before the Torah was given, the notion of conversion was not applicable because all people were equal, meaning everyone had the status of a Noahide. Thus, conversion didn't apply here. The only change was that the Torah was given. So what is he saying, Rabbi Abulafia, Rabbi Emden? Rabbi Emden says that there was no such thing as conversion. Similar to what Rabbi Abulafia says, Rabbi Abulafia said, you didn't need conversion. And he says there is no such thing as conversion before the Torah was given. Okay? That's a notion, that's the Yavets says, his view is the notion of conversion came into existence after the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. It was a birth of a nation. Okay? So what does it mean? Mount Sinai was not a conversion. What is a conversion? A conversion is when you join the nation. There was no nation to join. They became a nation. There was a birth of a nation. So we have different opinions in this way and that way. Then we have the opinion of the Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, an 11th century sage. And he says, the sages in France say that everyone had to convert because it was before the Torah was given, and they were not yet Jewish. However, I do not agree. It is my opinion that from the time that Abraham entered the covenant of circumcision, his children were Jewish and distinct from all other nations. So he says totally different. The other rabbi said, what we quoted was that you do need the conversion. They either was automatically, but Nachmanides says no. They were Jewish all along. So what exactly happened? So we have opinions this way, opinions that way. We need to go. So we need to dig a little deeper. We need to go further back, and we'll go into the Talmud, and we'll see how the Maimonides explains what the Talmud says. So in the Talmud, there's an interesting discussion. And the discussion is about a convert today. What does a convert need to do today in order to become Jewish? So the Talmud explains that there are 3 steps that needs to be done. What are the 3 steps? There is the circumcision, if it's a man. There is the dipping in the mikveh, and there is the offering of an offering to the temple. Those are 3 things that needs to be done, of course, in addition to accepting all the mitzvahs, all the commandments. What is interesting is the Talmud says clearly that where do we learn how to convert today a non-Jew to Judaism? We learn it from the story of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, because those 3 things happened to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, or right before Mount Sinai, as we'll soon see. So it seems like, yes, there was a conversion there. So let's see what's going on. So the Talmud in Keresis says, Rabbi is Rabbi Yehuda, the prince, and he says as follows: the offering of a convert is derived from the verse, as you are, so shall the convert be. And that's a verse in Numbers 15:15. We understand this to mean, says Rabbi, that just as your ancestors entered the covenant through circumcision, immersion in a ritual bath, and the sprinkling of the blood on the altar, so too the converts today enter the covenant through circumcision, immersion, and sprinkling of blood, which requires an offering. So in the Talmud, we see clear that yes, indeed, there was a conversion at Mount Sinai. Jewish people did convert. And Maimonides, as we said, he agrees, and he clearly specifies this. And he says the following: Israel had entered the covenant with God with 3 acts: circumcision, immersion, and offering a sacrifice. Circumcision took place in Egypt before the Paschal sacrifice, of which the passage states, no uncircumcised person shall partake of it. So with the exception of the tribe of Levi, the entire nation had until then neglected the covenant of circumcision in Egypt. Only the tribe of Levi circumcised. So Moses, our teacher, circumcised them right before they participated in the sacrifice. So that was the circumcision. Then the immersion was performed at the desert before the giving of the Torah. As the passage states, sanctify them today and tomorrow, and have them wash their garments. So this is referring to the immersion in the mikveh. Sacrifice were also offered then, as the passage states. And he sent the youth of the children of Israel, and they brought burnt offering. They offered these sacrifices on behalf of the entire Jewish people. So clearly, the Maimonides says clearly from Sinai that yes, there was a conversion. So that is the answer to question number one. Was there a conversion? Were all Jews required to convert after they received the Torah? After scanning the multiple opinions, we conclude that the answer is yes. Now the question number two. So now that we conclude that they did convert, so the question is, did they need to remarry their children? So here there's an interesting discussion regarding the laws that the Torah was given. Okay? So once the Torah was given, so they were given, let's say, the laws of kosher, or the laws, the example we're going to bring is the laws of tzara'at. What is the laws of tzara'at? That if a person has a leprosy, a stain, like a white skin condition, in a certain, if it fits the criteria and the conditions, then that person needs to be led outside the camp and needs to stay. There's a whole procedure what it has to be done. So the question is, the Torah laws were given, was it retroactively, or was it given from now on to the future? So if a person, the Torah was given, and let's say person came and he had the leprosy before they were told about it, is that person considered a leper? Does he have to perform the laws? So here, the Torah says in the Talmud, when a person will have in the skin of his flesh a wool white leprous mark or a scab, these laws, says the Talmud, apply only from this statement onward. So it does not go retroactively. Another example, we find when the Jewish people, during the time when they were in the desert, they were not required to slaughter the animals in the way we do it today. So any meat was okay. If it's a kosher animal, it was okay. You didn't have to slaughter it in this special way. But once they entered the land of Israel, then they were required to slaughter the animals. And the question was in the Talmud, what happens with meat? Let's say they brought in meat before they entered the land of Israel. They brought it with them. So before they entered, that meat was kosher. Once they entered the land of Israel, is that meat considered not kosher? Or being that it was started, they had it from before, maybe it was kosher. Maybe they can use it. And the Talmud remains with a question. The Talmud remains with a question. As we'll see, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, were Jews permitted to eat meat that they brought into Israel that had not been slaughtered according to ritual law. The question cannot be answered and therefore stands. So if that question stands, that means that this question really is not clear whether it happened retroactively, whether the laws apply retroactively or not. So if that is the case, then the question is, that means that we don't know exactly about the situation with the Jewish people, whether they needed to remarry their wives or not. And if that is the case, why don't we find any records that Jews performed a mass wedding and they remarried their wives? We don't find it anywhere. Today we do, there's Chabad in New Jersey, Rabbi Kanelsky does mass weddings, makes people who never had a chuppah, makes them, mass chuppahs. We didn't find it there. We didn't find it that the Jews had it in the Mount Sinai. So here comes a very interesting, brilliant idea, a question, a thought from Rabbi Yosef Rosen. We called him the Rogachev Rav, the Rav of Rogachev. He was a chassid and a genius, great genius, lived before the war. And what he says basically is that the status of the Jewish people before the giving of the Torah was somewhat in a quasi status. It was not here nor there. When they received the Torah and they did convert, the conversion worked retroactively. That those Jews before them, they were in a quasi status, and when they did convert, it worked retroactively, that they became Jewish retroactively. Let's see it inside. It says, the truth is that the status of Abraham's descendant was somewhat indeterminate until the Torah was given. And after the Torah was given, they became Jewish retroactively. And he says, the proof is that the Talmud in Yevamos 186b tells us that the mixed multitude alone had the status of converts. But if all Jews converted at Sinai, did they not all have the status of convert? We must therefore deduce that the Jewish people became retroactively Jewish and did not have the status of converts. Okay? So that's according to the Rogachev. He says this was a unique conversion. They were not fully Jewish, and therefore they required conversion. But on the other hand, they were not Noahites. They were not like any other goy. They were not considered like a regular non-Jew. Therefore, they didn't need to remarry because they became Jewish retroactively. But here again, what about Moses? What about Moses? How could Moshe Rabbeinu marry the convert? Okay, Moses was married to a Midianite, so why didn't he need to remarry? So here comes the Rogachev, and he really comes up with a real novelty. And he says, who was Moses' wife, Zipporah? Where did she come from? She was a Midianite. She came from Midian. Who was Midian? The father of the Midianite nation. He was the son of the wife of Abraham, the wife of Abraham, Keturah, that he married at the end of his life. He remarried Keturah. When Abraham remarried Keturah, he was already circumcised, of course, and she also converted. And she had a child. She had the children, and one of them was Midian. So therefore, says the Rogatchover, that these people, the people of Midian, they also were in the same status as the Jewish people. And those of them who came, like Yitro and his daughter and his family, they came to Matan Torah and they received the Torah. Their conversion, along with all Jewish people, was also retroactively. That's how he explains it. Let's see it inside. It says we might suggest that the same applies to the nation of Midian inasmuch as they also descended from Abraham, and their ancestor was born to Abraham after Abraham was circumcised. So they're also, their mother converted. Therefore, Midianites who converted when the Torah was given were also deemed Jewish retroactively, and this was the status of Tzipporah, Moshe's wife. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu was allowed to marry her. Okay? Now the Rebbe comes and gives a different answer. And the Rebbe says something else. The Rebbe says that we find something. You know, it's interesting. The Maimonides talks about certain mitzvahs that Moses' father received when he was in Egypt. What was the mitzvahs is not clear. It doesn't clarify. What mitzvah? Because we know the mitzvahs, we received the mitzvahs, the commandments of the Mount Sinai. But certain mitzvahs we received before. The mitzvah of Shabbat, for example, we received before we came to Mount Sinai. The mitzvah of the Paschal offering was before. A lot of mitzvahs. The mitzvah of circumcision was we received before. So the Maimonides says that Amram received some mitzvahs in Egypt. What was the mitzvahs? The mitzvah of marriage. Because up until then, people didn't have a process of marrying like we do today. Just you like someone, you take her into your house, and she becomes your wife. But by Amram, it says the word vayikach as Bas Levi. He married. And that means that they had the mitzvahs of marriage even before they received the Torah. Let's see what the Rebbe says inside. It says, Rebbe, even if we suppose that the Jewish people had the status of converts, they would not have needed to remarry. And how is that? Says the Rebbe, the Talmud expounds on the passage, and a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. Who is that person? Of course, we're talking about Moses' father, Amram. He married his mother, Yocheved. He performed an act of marriage. The meaning here is that Amram betrothed his wife with a precise ceremony that we perform after the Torah was given. So that's why, says the Rebbe, they did not need to remarry. Because they already did. They did it. So the Jewish people didn't need to remarry. They did that mitzvah, they did perform. So before the Torah was given, there was no ceremony or betrothal and marriage. In Egypt, God appeared to Amram and instructed him to betroth his wife. And that's what he explains. Inasmuch as Jews betrothed their wives even before the Torah was given, in the precise manner that they would after the Torah was given, there was no requirement for them to remarry the wives after the Torah was given. The previous marriage remained valid. Okay? So that is true for the rest of the people. But again, what about Moses? What about the Cohens? If we take the opinion that there was a conversion and the wives were considered converts, how could the Cohen remain married to their wives? And here comes the Rebbe and explains a very interesting law. And he says, we know there is a law regarding the high priest. The high priest is not just like the regular Cohen. There's one person there is the Cohens. We said all the priests, they cannot marry a divorced woman, they cannot marry a convert. The high priest, the highest priest, he has an additional laws. He also cannot marry a widow. He must marry a virgin. Now, in marriage, today, when you go to a wedding, there is one ceremony under the chuppah, and not everybody knows that this ceremony actually entails two different parts. There is what's called the betrothal, and there is actually the actual marriage. Back in the days, these two parts were not done at the same time. You first betrothed a woman, and you're betrothed with a ring, or you give her something, and you say, you are now sanctified to me. But then she's considered arusa, which means a betrothed woman, but they're not married yet. No one is allowed to be with her, but he also is not allowed, the laws of marriage is not yet fully until they consummate the marriage by bringing her in under the chuppah, taking her at home. So that's what we do under the chuppah now, both of them. First we do the ring, and then we do the under the chuppah and the 7 blessings and so on. So what happens if a high priest betrothed a widow before he became high priest? He's allowed. Before he became high priest, he was a regular Cohen. A regular Cohen is allowed to marry someone who is a widow. And then they appointed him to become high priest. He didn't consummate the marriage yet. He didn't make the complete marriage. The question is he allowed to complete it, or does he have to stop? Does he have to leave her? And the answer is yes, he is allowed. Because he began in a permissible way, that's why he's allowed to do this also after, to remain married to her. Let's see it inside. Okay, so now can a Cohen Gadol marry a widow if he betrothed her before being appointed? And here is, the Rebbe brings, the Mishnah states, if a priest betrothed a widow and was then appointed to be high priest, he may marry her. Since the betrothal was performed in a permissible manner, the priest may complete the betrothal and marry the widow. If this is true in a case when only the betrothal was performed in a permissible manner, how much more so in a case where the marriage itself is performed in a permissible manner? Therefore, even after Moses became a priest, he was permitted to remain married to Tzipporah with her status as a convert. Why? Because when he married her, she was permitted to him. So when did he become high priest? Later on. That is why Moshe Rabbeinu was allowed to marry her. So now we have all the answers. Okay, and to conclude. So we conclude all the answers that Moshe Rabbeinu is allowed to marry her. That's why the Cohens were allowed to stay with their wives. They didn't have to separate from them. The Jews were either converts or became retroactively. Jewish. But either way, what we did not address yet is the simple answer. We have Moshe Rabbeinu had clear answers why he was allowed to marry Tzipporah. So when that person, Zimri, came over to Moshe Rabbeinu and asked him, is this woman allowed to be, am I allowed to be with this woman? And he said to Moshe, if you say no, then how come you're allowed to marry with Tzipporah? What did Moshe do? Didn't say it. He forgot. He went blank. Pinchas came and said and reminded him that a case of when you see person in act and doing such an act, then a zealous person is allowed to go and kill him. And he told him, listen, you carry out whatever you read a letter, then you carry out the letter. But why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu answer him? Tell him exactly why he's allowed and you're not allowed. And here the Rebbe says is a message that you don't always have to answer. Sometimes people come to you with questions, with complaints. They try to debate you. They try to trap you. Their interest is not sincerely to ask questions, to know, to gain knowledge. They want to do what they want. They basically want to complain. They want to challenge you. Sometimes you have people here in the neighborhood, it's a big problem. We have also in Brighton Beach and this area, you have a lot of, what do you call them, the missionaries. And they try to come to Jews and try to start a debate and to convince you that they have proof that this is that. Do you go into a debate with them? If you go into a debate with them, you're just feeding them. They're not there to find out the truth. They're not there to prove something. They're not there to find the truth and see what is right. They're there to prove their point. And that's why we don't need to go into debates. And just like the Frierdiker Rebbe, just like the previous Rebbe, in 1927, when they came to him and they tried to stop, the Frierdiker Rebbe said he's going to go like without any reasoning, just straight to stand his ground with stubbornness, with Jewish stubbornness, saying, I'm a Jew and I'm good. That's the way I'm going to do. Azoi und nicht anders is the saying in Yiddish. That's the way it's going to be, nothing else. Sometimes you just don't answer them. You just do what you need to do. And that stubbornness and that Jewish values that we have, we go with the firm strength. This brings out the revelation of the neshama. And that will lead us to ultimately that we will see the neshama shining by all of us with the coming of Mashiach very soon. Amen. So thank you for joining, gentlemen. And Mitzvah Hashem, we shall continue Tanya tomorrow morning. Hope to see you. Any questions, any comments?